My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
Welcome to the Leader Assistant Podcast. Turn the volume up. This next part is good.
The Leader Assistant Podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become confident, game-changing leader assistants.
Howdy, friends. Thanks for tuning in to the Leader Assistant Podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Burrows, and this is episode 124. You can check out the show notes at leaderassistant.com/124. I'm very excited. I can't believe I am at 124 episodes, but here we are. Thanks for coming along for the ride. So I'm actually going to do the next few episodes are going to be an Ask Me Anything series. So you've asked me questions via email, via Facebook, via LinkedIn, at virtual webinars that I've done, and I've kind of gathered these questions and I've split them up into 4 or 5 episodes to answer them for you. So this is going to be a little bit different of a format to mix it up. Had a great interview with Ann Hyatt, former executive business partner to Jeff Bezos, as well as Marissa Mayer, CEO of Yahoo now, and Eric Schmidt when he was the CEO of Google. So great interview last week. That's episode 123. But we are going to shift to this Ask Me Anything format for the next few episodes. If you have questions that you'd like me to answer in a future episode, please email your questions to podcast@leaderassistant.com. That's podcast@leaderassistant.com. I will add your question to the list and answer it in a future episode. Okay, let's jump into today's questions. The first one comes from Beth L. Beth asks, if you didn't have to worry about money and paying your bills, what passion would you pursue? Beth, that is a great question. Thank you for submitting it. I would say I'm really passionate about outdoors and music. So if I really didn't have to worry about money and paying bills, honestly, I'd probably get really into producing music. I might actually do this anyway a little bit if I have some time. Like getting back into playing guitar. I would learn a little bit more about electronic music and loops and drum pads, all that kind of fun stuff. But I would love to spend my days just creating music, different types of music, and hiking in the mountains. So those are the passions I would pursue. I'd be hiking in the mountains outdoors with my family, with my wife and boys, and making music all day, every day. It just sounds really, really fun if I didn't have to worry about trying to make money from that music. So thanks again for the question, Beth. That's a good one. All right, so Catherine asks, if you could give advice to your younger self at the beginning of your career, what would it be? I would say at the beginning of my career, man, this is always a tough one because there's so much that I would want to tell my younger self. But if I'm going to have to choose one, because Catherine says if I could give one piece of advice, I would say don't put all your eggs in one basket. And I've talked about this before in some other episodes, and I've talked about this in my book, The Leader Assistant. But I made the mistake of having all of my friends, all of my financial income, all of my community in one organization and one job. And I would definitely tell my younger self to diversify and invest in a more broad and diverse career savings account, because when the you-know-what hit the fan, I pretty much had to start over. And so I definitely am a fan of multiple streams of income, and not putting all your eggs in one basket. So great question, Catherine. Hopefully that answers it for you. Next question is from Amy B. Amy asks, what is your best piece of advice for maintaining a good work-life balance, especially while working from home? So I talk a lot about burnout, and I talk a lot about this in prior episodes and in my book. But my best piece of advice is set boundaries with your executive, with your colleagues, with your family. Say, hey, listen, my executive and I, we do something where Monday and Wednesday nights are kind of our set aside work late nights, but then the other nights we don't work late. And so we basically have it set up so that our families know what to expect. So our families can trust that we're not going to just work late every night and they don't ever know. But also they know that Monday nights are focused, Dad's going to be focusing on work on Monday night. Or I with my family, I take a couple hours on Saturdays to work on the podcast. And so they just know, like, hey, Dad's going to go heads down on the podcast for a couple hours, then he's going to hang out with you. So just setting up these boundaries and schedule on both sides, professional and personal, really, really helps maintain a balance. And really, I like to call it life balance, not necessarily work-life balance, because we all have one life. It's just more balance. And yeah, so boundaries, rhythms, work out with your executive a 24-hour stretch period every weekend where you don't check email or Slack or Microsoft Teams or call each other unless it's truly an emergency. That's one of the best ways boundaries are one of the best ways to maintain that balance. And then on a related note, Don M. asks, how do you avoid burnout when you're in a high capacity role and the expectations are very high? So going back to my last point about boundaries, burnout happens when we are all in on one thing and we don't know how to shut it off. And so even if you have a high capacity, high expectation role, if you take those 24-hour stretches every weekend where you're totally disconnected, if you have those rhythms in place where certain nights you're going to work late and other nights are off limits, you're not going to work late, you're just going to force yourself to say no, then you can work in those high capacity, high expectation roles and really do well for a long time and have a sustained tenure, if you will, in that role. So I recommend the boundaries thing. I also recommend hobbies. So find a hobby that will challenge you and really stimulate your creativity so that you can do something outside of work that energizes you. That's one of the best ways I've found to resist burnout as well. And again, I talk about that a lot in my book. That's the entire pillar 4 of my book is about exercising self-care. And I talk about burnout creep, burnout, and that's in chapter 23, and then burnout stressors and signs in chapter 24, and then the antidotes to burnout in chapter 25. So thanks for the question, Don. Hopefully that's helpful. Definitely can dive in deeper in pillar 4 of my book, The Leader Assistant. And you can check out that book at amazon.leaderassistant.com. And the ebook is only $1.99 for the month of July on Amazon. So amazon.leaderassistant.com. All right. Well, Beth, Catherine, Amy, and Dawn, thank you so much for the questions in this episode 124 of the Leader Assistant Podcast. Next week's episode will be some questions from an anonymous assistant. She preferred to be anonymous. And we're going to talk about a couple scenarios that she's struggling with her executive and being difficult. So if you're driving in your car listening to this, honk your horn. If your executive can be difficult at times, just make sure nobody's around so you don't cause a wreck. But yeah, hopefully you can check that out. Episode 125 next week. Look forward to chatting with you then. Hope you like this new format. If you have questions, email them to podcast@leaderassistant.com, and I'll add them to the list to add on a future episode. Have a great week and talk soon.
My daddy has stinky feet. Please review on Apple Podcasts. GoBulls.com